And so you just have to pay attention to your graph as to how it starts, and then recognize the pattern count, how it's going to be woven in the rhythm, and then off you go to the end. Let's see, we have the zigzag pattern. Here it's called the zigzag bar. So that also is a black white pattern, so that um, you need to figure how it's going to end at the right side. So you're starting at the left and you're going to weave black, white, white, black, white, black, black, white, and see where the end is, and um, hopefully you can have it end with the black bar. So you do have to consider that. So when I did the robe for the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, I had to really do a huge graph, because I needed that V in the center, and then I had to do enough of the spiraling lightning to make sure that I had the diagonals as well as the bars in the correct area, and deep enough to be a whole pattern. Now, I was talking to you about the patterns of the compact pattern Raven's Tail, and just in examining those 11 Raven's Tail book that Cheryl Samuel was able to track down in all the world. She found just these few examples. And I sometimes think that the fact that it was just so few that exist, that it almost gives us freedom. We can just spin off of what we find there with those few to remind us what was traditional, and then we can't stay with just those few. We have to come up with our own stories and our own weaving. And so I think that just because they are so few, it sets us free. It inspires us to think, what else would the ancestors have done? And how can we do what is pertinent, what is of this time? I said that there is about 30 rows per inch. And so I had to figure that estimate into how deep I wanted that row of patterns, that area of the pattern that I wanted. I wanted to graph it out ahead of time to figure the depth of that area, especially with what my intention was for the pattern. So I had a lot of work to come up with this, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4 graph papers taped together, and quite a lot of work, a few days of penciling in my, well, actually a few days of figuring it out, and then a few days of penciling it in, so that I was sure about the depth of that and the placement. So I went to the middle, I figured out where the middle was, and then meticulously I took this pattern and went backwards to find how this pattern was going to start. And so that is why I took that time, so that I could figure the center, and then go backwards to find out where on that right side where I'll start, where in this pattern does that start. That will end up to having it be in the center. And then once I figured that out, I knew that following the pattern, I'd be, however that ended up there would mirror the amount that was how I started it. So I really recommend that you, even though you have the, like Doug said in one of the previous classes, we have a lot of patterns that have been shared, and it's a wonderful thing. And these are from the Raven's Tail Guild out of Juneau. The weavers got together and took there's, I think, two of them. There's this one as well as a dictionary of techniques. So anyway, there are a lot of patterns. Like there's some new ones as well as some very traditional ones, and they're all, you know, discussed and photographed or diagrammed here with various counts. And so it's good to have that, and it's good to have as many patterns as you can have, but you really need to draw them out. You need to really have a handle on your patterns. You need to understand them. You need to know the count. You need to know the rhythm. Let's see. Here's a pattern I came up with for the chevron, and here is another project with a different count, and so I then drew it out. I'm not drawing it out to envision it. I'm drawing it out to establish its width. On the grid paper, you can make these little graph squares represent 2 warps, or you can make those graph squares represent 1 warp in your calculation or in your drawing out your pattern. But even something as simple as the concentric patterns, they really need to be drawn out in the proportion that you want. Like in the first evening, I talked about a concentric patterns that were 48 wide, right? So when you are calculating these, you're talking about the widest area of your pattern is where you say that is 48 wide. Now, of course, when you started it, it wasn't 48 wide here in the chevron pattern. Then a couple rows down, then you've expanded it. Now that is the apex is 48. And so when you calculate placement, you're going to use the widest count for these. So in this example, I have three rows, but oftentimes it's 2 rows, 2 ground rows between the 3 strands. And then usually you leave space for the treasure. But you can see how deep these are by the 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. In this example, the chevron only has three concentric lines to make up that. So here's another example of someone calculating and how they how large this is going to be, how many concentric rings or lines will make up the box within the box. So my advice to you is to always, even though you have been provided in the dictionary or in the pattern book, you've been provided a short section of that graph, I advise you to graph your own, and especially if it's a black, white, white, black design that has that. Because when you're weaving along and you're watching a complicated, complex pattern, it really, you don't want to get lost with the colors. Like you go and you see a graph with the black and the white, and then you make a graph of the white and the black, so that you don't say, oh, this is black, but right now I'm going to weave a white black, so I've got to figure, okay, this is not black, this is white. No, don't do that. Graph out. Have a black white graph, have a white black graph. Another thing I want to say is that it really helps your placement and to instantly know where you're at, and to know that you are changing from a black white to a white black unit, to put a piece of different color yarn in the area, in that one place where it switches from the one unit to the next unit. Mark it. Put the yarn up with each change of the pattern. Even though you had your pattern provided for you, draw it out anyway. So having those patterns and getting familiar with the patterns, even if you weave a lot, and the count is different, the size unit is different, graph it out and have it ready for you when you're weaving. And then now people are so proficient with the computer and the Excel and drawing out patterns on the computer. Even if you do that, you use the computer, print it out and color it in yourself. Take the time. You're taking the time to weave, so take the time to graph your weaving ahead of time so that you're not slowed down by that. Well, thank you so much for listening, and now we'll do some practice.